Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something that literally affects every single student, parent, and educator here in the District of Columbia. We're talking about the framework of student discipline. You know, if you've ever felt like school rulebooks are just this giant maze of overlapping jargon, well, trust me, you are definitely not alone. So we're going to transform those complex rules into super clear, actionable insights. Let's just dive right in. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with Section 1, more than just punishment. 2, 5 core discipline principles. 3, balancing support and consequences. 4, why equity matters. And finally, Section 5, a guide for families. Discipline is not just about punishment. We really need to start right here because this quote, it completely flips that old school mentality on its head. Historically, discipline was seen purely as a penalty. You do something wrong, you get punished. But in DC, modern educational policy recognizes a much broader and honestly a much more constructive goal.
So what does discipline in DC actually mean now? Well, it's a comprehensive system focused on safety, school climate, due process, and keeping students connected to learning whenever possible. Yes, it is absolutely about safety, but it's equally focused on the overall vibe of the school and keeping kids in the classroom. The whole point is to reduce unnecessary exclusions and address behavior way before it boils over.
Moving into Section 1, more than just punishment, the DC landscape.
Now, the district obviously operates with both DC public schools and public charter schools. Just imagine two students for a second. One's at a traditional public school, the other's at a charter. While their principals might use, slightly different day-to-day procedures, both schools must strictly follow local laws and federal civil rights laws. They both handle the whole shebang, everything from attendance and classroom disruption to severe issues like bullying, fighting, or safety threats. The big takeaway here, no matter what type of public school it is, those baseline student rights are locked in and protected.
All right, Section 2, 5 core discipline principles, the foundation. There are 5 absolute bedrock principles holding up this entire system. First up is fairness. Rules and consequences must be clearly known in advance. Nobody likes a surprise penalty, right? Next is due process, meaning notice and the actual opportunity to respond. Then proportionality. The response has to actually fit the behavior. Fourth is educational continuity, keeping students learning. And finally, equity, meaning absolutely no unlawful discrimination. These 5 pillars are huge because they literally dictate a student's academic progress and long-term outcomes.
Let's head into Section 3, balancing support and consequences, 2 approaches.
So how do schools balance maintaining order while actually keeping kids engaged? Well, it's kind of a dual approach. On one side, you've got exclusionary discipline. Think out-of-school suspensions and expulsions, which obviously remove students from the classroom. DC tries to reserve these strictly for the most serious conduct. On the flip side, and this is where things get interesting, we have restorative practices. We're talking mediation, reflection circles, and counseling. These are all about repairing the harm and teaching better behavior so the same issues don't just keep happening over and over again.
But, and this is a crucial caveat, restorative practices are not a substitute for safety. The goal isn't just to let misconduct slide. If there's serious violence, credible threats, weapons, yet schools still absolutely deploy those stronger disciplinary measures to maintain a secure environment for everybody else.
We also really need to highlight a vital layer of federal protection here. Federal law provides additional protections for students with disabilities, specifically those with an IEP or a 504 plan. For these kids, consequences can look very different. Schools are legally required to ask, hey, was this behavior directly caused by the student's disability? If it was, they might need to adjust the student's support plan rather than just handing down a standard punishment.
Section 4. Why equity matters. A national and local focus. Equity is a massive, heavily watched focus right now. Why? Because national data consistently shows that some groups of students end up with much harsher consequences than others for the exact same behavior. So, DC policymakers are laser-focused on consistent enforcement. To tackle implicit bias and those subjective, spur-of-the-moment decisions, there's a massive emphasis on staff training and really rigorously reviewing the data. The ultimate goal here? Reduce those unnecessary exclusions while still keeping the school totally safe.
And that brings us to Section 5, a guide for families, practical steps and questions. Okay, let's get practical. If a discipline issue lands at your front door, here are 4 steps you want to follow. 1. Act quickly and request copies of all notices and reports. 2. Ask the school for clear information and evidence. 3. Check immediately for those IEP or 504 plan protections we just talked about. And 4.
Keep a written timeline and document all communication. Seriously, doing this reduces so much panic and ensures you've got everything you need if an appeal pops up later. We also want to empower you with some specific questions you're entirely entitled to ask the administration. First up, what rule was allegedly violated, and what evidence does the school have? Boom. That establishes the basic facts right out of the gate and keeps everyone operating strictly by the book.
Next, you want to ask, is this a first incident or part of a pattern? Asking this is a real game changer because it helps figure out the proportionality of the response. It links right back to those core principles. It makes sure the consequence actually fits the specific context of your student's behavior.
You should also be asking, are there alternatives to suspension or expulsion? This is a brilliant question because it actively forces the school to pause. It makes them consider those restorative practices, like counseling or mediation, before they just default to kicking a student out of the learning environment.
And finally, can the school provide supports to prevent future incidents? By asking this, you completely shift the conversation. You're moving away from retroactive punishment and pointing everyone toward proactive, long-term student success by addressing the actual root causes of the behavior. So, what's the bottom line? Well, because exact rules can vary slightly depending on things like age, grade, or whether you're in a traditional DC public school or a charter, checking your specific school's current code of conduct early on is your absolute best defense. And if an issue does happen, prompt communication and careful written documentation are literally your best tools for getting a fair outcome.
I'm going to leave you with this thought to consider. Knowing your rights and the core principles of DC's framework, how will you advocate for fairness and educational continuity the next time a conflict arises in your school? Truly understanding this stuff isn't just about staying out of trouble. It's about actively participating in building a safer, more equitable system for absolutely everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.